Right, we're recording. I guess this is a special episode of MTMM Radio from the, what would you call it? Live on the scene at home, right?
Live on the scene at home. WFH. I can't believe, I don't know if that acronym was around beforehand, but I find it hilarious that there's now an acronym for working from home.
It's been around for a long
It
time.
has? Oh,
Yeah.
well, I just started hearing from it, and I've been working from home for 5 years, so there you have it.
Gee whiz, what an interesting time we are all in at the moment. So obviously there's one thing at the top of the mind of everyone at the moment, and that's this virus. And again, like the reason for doing any MTMM radio is to be able to create a platform for discussion on those topics and those conversations that we are finding ourselves repeatedly having. And I think they're good conversations to have. Again, we always talk about the connection between ignorance and fear, right? So I think anything that we can do to better understand what's going on and the things that we can do to best protect ourselves and to best protect each other is super important. So here we are. And an interesting MTMM radio with special guest and most proficient healthcare worker in the team, Katrina Smith. Katrina Borg. I can't believe I said that.
Ooh,
it's almost 6 months.
Slipped.
So basically, we've dragged Kat in as well. I think with a lot of the terms and lingo and stuff that's getting thrown around, like flattening the curve and all the stats that people are posting about the troubles with ICU and bed availability and stuff like that. I thought, why not use the best resource that we have who's actually worked in that environment to kind of give us all an insight in like, what the hell does any of this actually mean, right? So I'm happy for this conversation, I guess, to be kind of general in nature. Mags, I'm sure you got a lot of questions from clients. I know I've got a lot of questions from clients. Kat, I know you did 8 hours of consulting yesterday.
And emails.
Yeah. And I think we often say that the benefit of this team is having more than one coach. And I think having more than one coach in more than one country for us has been awesome to be an intermediary between what we're seeing with protocols being taken place in Canada and what we're kind of able to start to provide our Australian gyms and affiliates with to help them get prepared too. So hopefully this is of use to everyone within the community, everyone externally the community, anyone that wants a little bit of a heads up in what's going on, how can I protect myself and what's probably going to come and how can we prepare for it, okay? If nothing else, I think the summation of the synopsis we're about to talk about is the importance of continuing to control the controllables. And it's very encouraging when organizations like the World Health Organization promoting the things that we talk from day one with our clients of staying fit and healthy, staying active, prioritizing recovery and sleep, staying hydrated, and eating a well-balanced and nutritious and appropriate diet, right? Now, there's certainly going to be more challenges than usual with that. It makes things harder, but not impossible. So we're going to try and cover some of that as well. Okay. Do you want to start? What the hell are we looking at? What are we doing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just want to give a couple disclaimers before we start. And that is, we are releasing this it's the 19th of March today when we're recording, 18th in Canada. And so I think first and foremost, it's really important to consider the date of the information that you're getting. So if you're watching this in a week's time, it's very possible that mandates and regulations could have changed in that week. And so you always want to go with what's most up to date from leading organizations like the WHO, the CDC, and your local health authorities and governments. So
now, that might be something we can look to do is kind of keep updating the community too as that kind of stuff. Maybe once a week we can do that.
Yeah, but I mean, if you can't sleep and you're watching this at 2 a.m. on like the 24th of March, some of the things that we're going to discuss today, things might have changed. So definitely stay on top of that. I guess the second thing that I want to say is I do have a background. I spent my career as a nurse in critical care, and I came into that just as we were experiencing the SARS epidemic. So I have some experience in pandemics, epidemics, but it was a very different world, even just 10 years ago. And so
not a lot of WFH mags 10 years ago.
Not a ton. And we knew so much less. So things have definitely changed. Things are interesting, but I am not currently working right now. So I have no current frontline experience, which I think is important to highlight. Also, just some general background and knowledge that we can share.
Cool. So obviously buzzwords are getting thrown around a lot at the moment. And I think a lot of that adds to hysteria because people aren't quite sure what these terms mean. So I think we threw a couple in there. What's the difference between a pandemic and an epidemic?
So the only difference between an epidemic and a pandemic is a pandemic means that it's no longer containable. And so it's spread across global borders and boundaries, and it is worldwide.
Okay.
And so when it was declared a pandemic by the World Health Organization, did anything change? No, nothing changed from the day before, except that we're now acknowledging that, closing borders in one country is not going to affect the rest of the world, right? It is out there, and so each country needs to step up and take a little bit of responsibility and action in order to get this under control.
I might just shut that behind you.
I can, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Beautiful. Good job, babe.
I'm very talented. Not just a nurse.
Just
a nutritionist.
Just adjusting to working from home. Okay, cool. So is that kind of the idea now? Is that like the reason for all the change that we're seeing, all the implements is, social isolation and all the rest of it is to try to do what we can to stem the flow of what's to come? Or is it, like the measures that we're seeing both in Canada and Melbourne, from what I understand and what I gather, is doing more sooner to try to reduce the flow rather than waiting till everyone's sick and then trying to go crazy. Is that kind of?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're having a really hard time projecting numbers, but there's definitely a lot of estimates that are saying, 70 to 80% of the world's population is going to get COVID-19 over the next few months. We're not necessarily looking to decrease that number and to stop the virus in its tracks, although that would be wonderful if we could. What we're looking to do is we're looking to take that massive number of people that are going to get infected and spread it out over months instead of having it hit in the next 3 weeks, which is kind of Canada and Australia are projected to hit peaks in the next 3 weeks, even with the social distancing and other kind of actions that we're taking. So just because we see the numbers continue to climb day by day, it doesn't mean that we're not actually having some success in what we're doing. The numbers will climb. What we're trying to do is we're trying to really spread out that peak over as much time as possible. There was a good meme that was going around. I think I reposted it on my personal social media, and it said, similar to when everyone went out and panic bought toilet paper and now there's no toilet paper available. That's exactly what's going to happen with medical resources. And by medical resources, we mean staff, we mean human personnel, physicians, nurses, care aides, physical beds. That one's a little bit easier to work around, but the things that aren't easier to work around are ventilators and oxygen. Respiratory therapists in Canada. We have nurses and physicians who manage respiratory care here, but it takes a very long time to qualify someone to manage those types of devices. We're not going to get more qualified people.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is we're trying to spread that ventilator use out over time. Even if only 5% of the population who becomes infected requires hospitalization and ICU care, that still far and away exceeds the number of beds, ventilators, and personnel that we have to care for those individuals at any given time.
Okay, so maybe I can be like the layman's terms interpreter of all the stuff that Kat says. So essentially, if we're talking about flattening the curve, what we're saying is the same amount of people are going to require some sort of hospitalization from this. And what we're trying to do is spread that number as far as we can, rather than have the whole entire 5% in the hospital at the one time, right?
And that's, kind of what's happened in Italy is they've had that entire population who requires care kind of storm the hospital doors at the same time. And the medical teams there are having to make excruciating decisions about who now gets those resources and who doesn't, because there's not enough to go around. Whereas if we, spread that out over a period of time, hopefully we can recover people and move them on, free up those resources and move them on to the next person.
I think the other point to reiterate here as well is that if 80% of the population is going to get this in some form or degree, but only 5% is going to require hospitalization, having the virus, having the diagnosis is not necessarily a death sentence, right? And I think that's particularly important to keep in mind, particularly for our community that is, for the majority, kind of in that sort of 25 to 40 age bracket, relatively healthy when compared to the rest of the community. We're already a community that focuses on, not so much sobriety, but prioritizing recovery, getting enough sleep, eating properly, staying active, which are all, like we said, those factors of not potentially being able to reduce your chance or likelihood of getting COVID-19, but definitely be able to stem the effects and the severity to which you get it. Is that a fair thing to say?
That's fair, but also we have a lot of clients and community members in that 40 to 70 and even 80 age range. And, that's still true for them, that people who are working to keep their baseline healthier are going to have a better result from that. It's not the virus in and of itself that is particularly dangerous. It's the virus along with comorbid conditions, which tends to be diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, chronic lung illnesses, things like that. So that's where the problem really comes into play, and that's who's affected. There's been some really interesting data that's come out. One of the things that we see is every country is testing very differently. And so the numbers that we have are not maybe completely accurate or comparable. And so in some countries where they have tested only those who are symptomatic to the point of requiring some sort of care, whether that be inpatient or outpatient care, they are seeing numbers, which is kind of that 40 to 60 age range is the peak where the virus is hitting the hardest, and very low numbers in the younger population. What we're seeing in countries where they're testing everyone, regardless of severity of symptomology, they're testing healthy individuals who are showing no symptoms, but because they've had a contact with someone or have come back from overseas, in those countries, the graphs are completely the opposite. We're actually seeing the highest prevalence in the 20 to 29 age range by far, followed by 30s, 40s, 50s, and actually very, very few in their 60s, 70s, and above. So what that tells us is that this younger population frequently is experiencing no symptoms at all related to the illness, kind of like how we say kids don't experience symptoms.
And I guess that's the other thing too to keep in mind is when we look at some countries that are shutting down schools and some countries that aren't. I mean, if you think about kids not showing symptoms, but being little vector bastards of carrying the disease and spreading it, like it gets to a point where social isolation becomes important, not just from people that have traveled, but going to a family event just because they're family doesn't increase your immunity to whatever they're carrying. And if you've got cousins and family members who have kids at school, like the chance of risk of infection there is quite high, right?
Yeah, I think
I was reading something about how the culture in Italy had kind of contributed to, how bad it got, because there's so much mingling between younger people and older people as well, right? Compared to somewhere like Canada and Australia, which I found was pretty interesting as well, to your point, Ben, that, yeah, even though the kids might not be able to contract it, that's kind of how it becomes spreading.
They'll contract it, right? But they're just not symptomatic.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. And it comes down to the crux of it is, in order to develop a cure and treatment, we actually need people to get sick, right? Like we kind of need that to happen, right, for this to pass.
Well, and to develop any sort of natural herd immunity as well, right? So not just medical, treatment and vaccines, but also the reason it's infecting so many people is we haven't seen it before. Our immune systems are completely unaware this thing even exists. And so we've got no natural immunity. So to develop that, we have to be exposed to it. We just have to slow that exposure.
Yeah.
I think we were talking about terminology and the wording that we're using around this. And I think that's really important. And we are definitely all guilty of it. But I think using that term social isolation as opposed to social distancing, well, in some cases, it might actually be more accurate. I think phrasing it as a social distancing measure is probably a little bit better for our heads and our anxieties around things as well. Unless you're an introvert like me and like social isolation doesn't bother you in the slightest.
It is funny to see that we seem to live in a generation that has so much social anxiety, and so many clients that, you know, especially when it comes to being new to program and things like that, feel sometimes a sense of anxiety when going to social functions and how they're going to be received and blah blah blah. But then at the same time, when we get told like, okay, stay at home, it's like, I don't want to stay at home. Like, it's just, now I'm socially anxious about not being social, you know. It's kind of that damned if you do and damned if you don't. And I think, you know, for us, like, we're not necessarily trying to make light of the situation, and by no means are we not concerned. I mean, like, obviously we're here with mum. Mum falls into that, you know, pretty relatively high risk for pre-existing condition, and could potentially be, you know, if she gets sick, one of the percentage that might end up needing some sort of care or treatment. And Kat's pregnant too, right? So we are decently concerned with what's going on, but panicking is not going to help that. Right?
Increasing stress levels in general is not going to help that. And I think that's going to be very hard to keep under control, but every little bit that you can do to work on that.
And we've got, we've talked a lot, especially as a team, about how many different resources can we create over the next few weeks to keep people engaged, up to date, and entertained as well, right? And God, I hope this is entertaining, because there's going to be a lot of people with a lot of spare time. But I actually booked in to sit down and do a podcast episode with a GP, just to make sure I can clarify that I'm not missing anything medical in terms of needing to stock up on toilet paper, like, and filling the house with it, because I feel like I've either missed the point completely, or that kind of like irrational behavior is just like not only unnecessary, but it just promotes this kind of hysteria. And, while we are decently concerned about what's going to happen over the next few weeks, it's not the apocalypse. It's not the zombie, like, flesh-eating virus. Like, and I think we all just need to kind of calm down, take a breath, and just like understand that, yes, things are changing around us, and things are going to change, potentially for life as we know it, like, once this is over, in terms of what it means with international travel and like border protection. But also, if we're in an economy where we're finding that like 85% of people have the ability to work from home, what does that mean for our regular day-to-day life and landscape in terms of employment? And if we're going to be seeing more of that, then being able to work from home and being productive in an environment that you're not used to being productive in starts to become a really good and important skill, that this is the perfect time to practice, right? We've got a chat coming up with Heath Williams, who is going to take us through how to set up an ergonomic setup from working from home to make it as comfortable as possible. But I think there's a lot of things that will change, and I think panicking and being resistant to change and just want things to go back to the way they were, like, it's probably not even necessarily a conversation worth having, and it just becomes, okay, what can we do with what we've got now, rather than like freaking out because everything's changing around us.
And I think that's such an important point, because something that we've always preached within MTMM is control the controllables. And right now, there's some things happening that we don't have control over, but we all individually have the ability to have a positive impact on this thing by the decisions that we make starting immediately. And so we have the social responsibility to do that, but we can start by doing little things in our house that are going to progress this forward in a more positive manner. And then we have a lot of ability to do things for ourselves and for our family that are going to keep the dial moving on our own personal health and fitness, COVID-19 notwithstanding, right? So let's take the opportunity.
Yeah. I think what we want to avoid generally is this becoming an excuse to let our health and fitness fall on the wayside, right? And I think definitely what happens, we always think if we had more time that things would become much easier. If I didn't have to work full time, I'd be able to spend more time grocery shopping or meal prepping or getting to the gym and things like that. And I think what we're actually going to see is quite a rude awakening for most people, that actually that structure and that routine of having to go to work for those days, for those hours, actually forces you to get your ass into gear and do your grocery shop and get your meal done, because you don't have all the time in the world, right? So, and Mags, I know that you've said this has been a topic of conversation with a lot of your clients. I'm keen for you to weigh in here as well. But we always preach the importance of routine, the importance of systems, and the importance of those really strong behaviors. And I think it just becomes even more important that your routine is probably going to change over the next couple of months. And so it becomes super important to create a new routine that is productive, that is healthy, and start to stick to it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just having a conversation with a client earlier today, actually, and just kind of asking what she was initially struggling with during the transition of working from home. And the first thing she said was that, as soon as it's hard to not leave it to the last second to get out of bed, just roll out of bed, stay in your pajamas and start working, right? Because then you're very unproductive throughout the day. So she was asking me for my advice, and I say, well, I used to go to the gym in the morning, and that's how kind of like I started my routine. Or I'd go to a coffee shop, have something set up for early in the morning to get me out of the house, get me showered, get me ready, and get me out. And so I feel more productive that way. So now it's just a matter of, okay, maybe we're waking up and we're doing a yoga routine in the morning, or maybe we're waking up and going for a walk, something to get you out and get you moving in your day, I think is really important to implement when you're transitioning to working from home. I'm lucky enough to have my mom live a couple blocks away from me, so I'm able to kind of get myself out of my house and I can relocate to her place, just as a way of, changing my surroundings a little bit. So I think it's really important to first thing in the morning, kind of build that routine, because that's going to set the stage for the rest of the day. If you just roll out of bed and you start working in your pajamas and you're like, oh, this is great, like I'm super comfortable and stuff like that, you're not going to get a whole lot done during the day. And that's going to kind of lead to that feeling of being unproductive. And it's just kind of a deadly cycle from there. So I think starting first thing in the morning is going to be really, really important.
I think those kind of fallback principles that we always do harp on about, in terms of like, if you're hitting snooze 5 times before you're getting up anyway, and the first thing that you're doing with each day is procrastinating getting started, you're kind of setting yourself up for a less productive day, whether you're going into an office or not, right? So I think that's something that I would, encourage as well, is like, set the time that you want to get up and get on with it, even if it is just to have a stretch or make a coffee or anything like that. Because,
or if you're looking to get your steps up too, I think maybe if you live in an apartment building, like going and doing your stairs or doing a few flights of stairs or something like that, just find something that you're going to be able to do consistently every day.
The stairs get real crowded.
Yeah. If there's anyone else in there, avoid that.
Maintain stairs between each person, right? I think that's, we talk about working from home and the different challenges that brings too, but working out from home is probably something that we're gonna start to have to get super comfortable with. And look, we're pretty fortunate. We have the setup in the garage, and we know a lot of clients that do that, but a lot of clients that don't. I mean, if you can't get your hands on a piece of equipment, if anyone's listening in Melbourne and kind of needs a dumbbell or something else, I'm sure we can chat with us and help you out. But it's something that we're going to have to learn to get a little bit more comfortable with, is the fact that we're not going to be able to, for us CrossFitters, get into a class of 15 people and throw barbells around and slap each other on the ass with our tops off, I've
had this conversation a lot yesterday, multiple times with my clients, and some of them have gyms, some of them have a set of dumbbells. Everyone's a little bit different, but everyone I spoke to in all their different contexts and all their different living situations, everyone has the opportunity to create something. So some of these people have got healthy hips and knees, and they're CrossFitters, and it's going to look like a lot more running and sprint work and hill sprints and all of that sort of stuff outside, which is great as well. Push up your vitamin D a little bit. For some people, they're in an apartment, or they have a garage, and we've talked about, okay, do you have potting soil? Do you have big bags of rice? Are you a hoarder? Have you got,
I had squats to toilet paper.
Yeah, I had one client yesterday we were talking about odd objects around the house. He's like, oh, I've got some cinder blocks in the back. I was like, fantastic. That's actually really similar to those Chinese dumbbells they used in Asia at one of the championships, Pandaland, I think it was this year. So there's a lot you can do with that, be it deadlifting and squats and presses and all sorts of that. The other thing we said was grab a backpack. If you've got a backpack floating around, fill it with books. Like, everyone has that in their house, right? Yeah. Make a weight vest out of that. There's a ton you can do. And for, some of my clients who are power lifters, or it just means that we're going to be moving to a higher rep hypertrophy range, because we're going to be going lighter weight and, potentially working a little bit more HIIT and a bit more cardio and things that are novel to them, which means they're going to get a big adaptation.
If you are worried that you're going to get too proficient at moving your own body weight, let me assure you that is never going to be the case, right? Like, if you can't do a set, if you don't have push-ups, congratulations, you've got the perfect opportunity to start working on your push-ups, right? If you struggle to get to depth on a back squat or an overhead squat, congratulations, you've got a perfect opportunity to really start working on your thoracic and hip mobility, right? There is always going to be people who have a problem for every solution, right? And I think part of this is reframing your mindset and not looking at all the limitations, but all the opportunity that you do have, okay? If you think that bodyweight work is not enough to make you hurt, then let me introduce you to my friend acronym, the AMRAP, right? Like, there is so much that you can do to burn, to sweat, to hurt, and need zero equipment and zero space. That if you're not training and you're not staying fit and you're not staying active, like, it's because you're choosing to, right? Just working out. I think obviously nutrition is going to be huge at the moment as well. And I think there's always going to be certain complications and increased challenges and obstacles that come to staying to program and staying on track when you have situations like working from home in general, when you're working in the kitchen and you're constantly staring at the pantry and the fridge always seems to be calling your name when you're procrastinating from doing some work. But also, even in terms of more the practical of, like, certain food availability is quite different now. And we have become so used to being able to walk into a supermarket that's fully stocked every time we need something. And that might just not be the case at the moment. But there's, again, like the workout situation and like training, there's always going to be workarounds, right? And it's not going to be ideal, but it's definitely doable. And maybe it just means, hey, we're kind of eating rice 3 times a day this week instead of having 2 serves of oats and a serve of pasta, right? There's always going to be those little workarounds. You feel like you've got something to say?
Let us put to rest this idea that there's going to be massive food shortages, and if you love your oats and your pasta, you need to go buy 100 bags of them. The only reason that the shelves are a bit empty right now is because people are panic buying. And so what that means, especially for our clients who many of them are on a template, is it just means for a few days you might have to sub some of those items for something else. It does not mean it's going to continue like this. It does not mean you need to contribute to the problem and go stock up on all your MTMM approved foods.
And it doesn't mean you throw your program in the bin and just think,
we can
fuck it.
Always right? Work around it. We can always change things. And hey, maybe that's a good thing, trying things that are new. You get some different micronutrients, or you find some new foods that you love. The things that really haven't been short in any way are fresh foods, fresh fruits, fresh veggies. Meat has it been in some places a little bit short, only because the butchers have to butcher it.
Yeah.
And they're working extra hours right now too.
Definitely what I've seen as well is there doesn't seem to be the same shortages at local markets, farmers markets, local grocers as there is at those big chains, right? So I think in a time that you're looking to stay stocked up and also like to support small businesses too, right? Like, this is the perfect opportunity to go and meet the Persian dude that owns the little convenience store on Richards and Seymour, yeah. Like starting to there's a great opportunity to make some connections there, and because ultimately, like, we're all in this together, right? And we're all going to navigate as best we can, and even towards the people that are panicking and bulk buying toilet paper and stuff like that, although our first instinct is to want to shame and call out and everything else, I think that the better path is probably to try to be a little bit empathetic and to be able to say to those people, like, hey, like, we get it. Like, you're worried and you're stressed, but this is not the solution. And what this is doing is actually making things worse and not better. Right. And I think the more that we try to meet those kind of panicked attitudes with that response, as opposed to like trying to publicly fame and shame on Facebook and things like that, I think the sooner we get, to the solution to that problem. And once people realize, like, we are all in this together and 80% of us are going to be in some way inflicted by this virus, the more that we can start to work together to do what needs to be done to get through.
People are generally not malicious. They're not looking to be hurtful. They're not looking to throw other people down, but we are selfish and self-serving.
And we're panicked.
People do things out of fear, and the more education and the more discussions we can have around it, the better that will make things. In regards to fear of another sort, we've had a lot of clients asking us, like, do I need a corona profile? Do I need to change what I'm eating?
What supplements do I need to take?
And the answer to that is, well, it depends, because it always depends on your unique situation. For myself, we have a home gym. I work from home normally, so I probably don't need to change my profile from my baseline. But for someone who's total daily energy expenditure is maybe going to go down because they're not walking to and from work each day and walking around the office and being up and moving, yeah, we might need to change your profile a little bit. If you've gone from a heavy barbell strength hypertrophy down to body weight HIIT, we might need to change your profile a little bit to accommodate that change in activity. But those are all easy things to do.
Yeah.
Right?
What we're talking about, activity as well. I think one thing that I've noticed a lot of people saying is, got to be careful with high intensity because it's dampening on the immune system. Originally when it does occur. And I think what we need to do is just explain that, like, CrossFit style training or circuit style training and bodywork type training, it's not necessarily high intensity, right? Now, if you think of the kind of high intensity that you have to put yourself through in order to really weaken or momentarily dampen your immune system, if you've got a 2-minute Fran, that's the kind of high intensity that's probably going to do it. That kind of feeling when you can't move after a 2-minute workout and you're shallow breathing and you're coughing and you can taste blood in your mouth, that's high intensity. And even those amongst us that are the super elite and the super fit, they're probably only doing that once to twice a week in their training anyway, right? Now, training to get your heart rate up, to get your blood moving around your body, to prime your lymphatic system, to get a sweat on, to get some heavy breathing is fine, right? And if anything, it's encouraged because it's going to keep us healthy. It's going to keep us active, right? So I think we want to dispel that fear that's something that we need to be wary of, and essentially go from there. And yeah.
Yeah, and I think also being just aware of your context as you would at any given time. If you're starting to feel a tickle in your throat or you're getting a bit sneezy, not like me, not these allergies, you're feeling very fatigued, that's probably not the day to try and emulate a Fran style workout at home. Do some yoga, do some stretching, go for a walk, keep it a bit lower intensity, but continue to move.
Yeah.
Right? I think that, and that's just common sense, and I think kind of basic non-COVID-19 related, right? So just being a little bit smart and diligent with our training as well.
All right. So because we are recording this sort of stuff on, necessarily on the fly and trying to keep everyone, on point and engaged, I actually do have an initial consult that I need to jump into. So I think what we might do is take a break here. We're going to upload this one directly into the MTMM community now, okay? And then Mags, if you're free later this afternoon, let's reconvene and kind of finish this conversation.
And while we're taking a break, maybe take it as an opportunity to get a couple Tabatas under your belt, take the dog for a walk.
Start working on that 10-minute plank.
Yeah, we'll talk some more nutrition specifics when we come back.
I think when we come back, we might just touch on the different supplements, different nutrition protocols, and go from there.
Beautiful.
Easy.
All right.
Talk
to you soon.
All right. All right. Welcome back. As you can see, we've changed clothes, which means we've slept, which means we've also survived another day in the otherwise uncertain time and uncertain world. So Obviously, things are pretty crazy on our end. Obviously, if you're listening to this as well, no doubt you're wading your way through a hell of a lot of change. And so as much as we wanted to get this out last night, Australian internet is pretty poor. And with everyone working from home at the moment, the internet load is going to struggle. So Mags, thanks for making the time to come back and finish the conversation. I know you're crazy, silly busy as well. So I think we finished off with our last chat. We were trying to dispel a few myths in terms of, what terms mean, what's actually happening, what's occurring, what the response is that we're seeing. And we were starting to go down that path of giving some actionable items at what we can be doing, what we should be eating. Obviously, we're nutritionists. That's a really big one for us. So again, we're joined by our resident nurse, resident bookworm, all things science, biology.
All things nerd. Katrina
Borg. Get the name right. So I think a really good place for us probably to kick off is we're certainly seeing plenty of IG influencers, plenty of supplement companies, plenty of institutions that you've never heard now claim to have the immunity boosting supplement, powder, tablet, pill. Do you want to take us through a little bit of, what vitamins and minerals are worth trying to supplement during these times and what is just complete bullshit? And then I think we'll do that from a supplement term. And then I know you're studying herbology as well as part of your master's. So probably a perfect time to have a little bit of a chat on the herbal front as well. What has the proof that is worth doing and what's not?
I can probably make this really short and sweet for you guys, which I think everyone would appreciate.
Especially the data.
Yeah.
Halfway limit.
Bottom line is now is not the time to make big changes. If you've been an MTMM community member, if you've been an MTMM client, surely then over the last couple of years, we've worked at increasing whole foods in your diet, decreasing any sort of packaged or processed items, and eating a diverse array. So lots of grains, lots of different starchy carbs, lots of veggies, lots of fruits, high quality meats, dairy products. If you're eliminating any of those groups from your diet, there's probably a particular reason for it, and we've discussed it and worked around it. So it's not the time to rewrite things. We just want you to keep practicing those, because that's ultimately what's going to keep you the healthiest and the most vital during this time.
It is kind of ironic when you go to a supermarket and you see the shelves are bare, but I haven't yet been into a supermarket where the perishables are all gone. And it does make me think we're a little backward in terms of what we're prioritizing here generally as a community.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are panicking and they're thinking, oh, the stores are going to shut, or I'm going to be isolated and I'm not going to get out, so I'm going to stock my shelves with things that don't perish. And I do understand that line of thinking, but definitely so long as you have access to healthy and fresh foods, you probably want to lay off the canned goods and the packaged goods, because they are more highly processed. They do have higher sodium contents. We don't want to get through this pandemic to have, everyone having heart attacks down the road and issues with blood pressure because of what they've been consuming. Certainly having, a couple of those items spare in your cupboard is good, but your grocery shop shouldn't really change from what you've been on. It should be all of the fresh, good stuff.
It's probably an element too there of, now more than ever is not the time to have those temptations sitting in the cupboard at home when you're setting up your working from home space, kind of looking directly at the kitchen, and probably hearing things like the crackers and the cookies and stuff start to gently coo your name. Right?
And even simple things. And this
Maggie's nodding her head.
yeah. This might fly in the face.
My office is in my kitchen.
Of what we normally try and do, because often we're looking for ways to minimize our food prep and make it as streamlined as possible. But when you're working from home, and certainly the three of us can attest to this, sometimes it's actually really quite beneficial to have food on hand that you need to prep, that you can't just go grab a handful of at a time, that you actually have to sit down and make the salad or make the deep dish chicken casserole, things like that. Because when they're just, I'll grab a handful of this every time I go by the kitchen, or I'll grab a handful of nuts, those might be really nice and rich in selenium and have lots of good nutrients, but the cal and fat content, if you're doing that you're walking by your kitchen 10 times a day and you're grabbing a handful every time, it's going to have an impact, right?
I think that kind of stems to the base of the MTMM philosophy too, right? Where it's not, you can't have a Tim Tam. It's not that you can't have a Tim Tam when you have a cup of tea, but if you start having 5 or 6 cups of tea a day, that starts to add up in terms of how many kind of Tim Tams that is. And that kind of absent-minding snacking is really, when we start to get ourselves in trouble. I know even for myself, I'm a big one with nuts and almonds. And if they're in the kitchen and not like in the pantry, which for us is kind of in the laundry, it's kind of every time you wander through the kitchen and you have a half a handful of cashews, 400 gram bag of cashews can go in 2 days, right? And when you start to work out, the numbers of how many calories and how many fats that is, especially in a time when most of us aren't as active as we normally are, we're kind of being like doubly done here, right?
I think, within the community, you may have heard your coaches refer to it as insensible calorie intake, right? In the medical community, we talk about insensible heat loss. It's kind of the same thing. So we also have a rule that we've instituted in our household at different times, sometimes better than others, which is no eating standing up. And that's probably a really good one if you're starting to work from home, because that does eliminate a lot of the kitchen snacking, as well as a lot of the snacking while you're preparing items. So, I mean, that's a little bit kind of off the topic of where we're going, but ways to monitor your intake while you're working from home. In terms of vitamins and supplements and things like that, there is nothing we have rushed out to buy in our household. We have stocked up on a little bit of extra protein powder just because the butchers are working overtime right now, and quality meat can be hard to come by in the bigger supermarkets.
I think our reason for stocking up too is that we do have a number of clients here in Melbourne, and our kind of thought process behind that is like, that's probably for a lot of people the last thing they might consider on stocking up from. And again, we don't want them to be missing their protein goals or their macro goals just because of the change in circumstance.
So if you are in Melbourne and you are short on protein, we've got
a few bags,
but there's nothing. There was no green supplement. There was no special immune boosters that we went out and purchased, because really what you need to be doing is eating that quality, diverse, whole foods diet. There are a couple of nutrients that kind of spring to mind when we all think about illness, whether it just be seasonal cold and influenza or COVID-19. And probably the biggest ones that I see people run for are zinc, vitamin C, and magnesium. Sorry, not magnesium. Echinacea. Sorry, we're losing it here. So
would we put echinacea in the herbal column though?
Yeah. Herbal supplements, vitamins, minerals, we kind of jump for all of them. We'll start with zinc. Zinc is the only one that has any sort of research to support its use in terms of improving immune function. And there's actually some really good studies that have been done. Again, this is not COVID-19 specific. This is more as it relates to cold and flu. But the science does show us that if you're kind of starting to have those symptoms where I'm not sure if I've got a stuffy nose, I'm not sure if I've got a sore throat, I may be fighting something, maybe coming down with something. If you can get on a little bit of bonus zinc within the first 24 hours of those symptoms appearing, you're not going to fight off anything in all likelihood that's coming, but you can decrease the severity and the duration of the illness.
I say anecdotally, I would take zinc like I think most people might take Panadol, right? At the first sign of kind of those glands being up a little bit or just not feeling 100%, maybe a little congested, I'll have a zinc or two with my fish oil, which we might get to. And I very rarely get sick.
It's aggravating how rarely he gets sick. So definitely, and that doesn't have to be anything special or fancy. You can just go get some zinc from the pharmacist or the chemist. Follow the directions.
Or the supermarket, right? Too, most
places, yeah. Follow the directions on the bottle because they are all compounded a little bit differently, but generally you're looking for about 15 milligrams and you just take that once a day. I recommend taking it away from any other meals or supplements other than fish oil. Because it can impair absorption of a lot of other nutrients and vice versa. So I just tend to take that one separately.
Calcium tends to be one they put a lot with it too, right?
No, not with zinc.
Oh, it's Meg.
Yeah.
Why are we both on a magnesium?
I don't know. Maybe we're a bit low. So that, that's definitely something that it's worth having in your house. Whether or not it's going to be helpful specific to COVID-19, who knows? But I think one thing that, is interesting to note during this time is, particularly in Australia, as of a couple days ago, they had done 81,000 COVID-19 tests. And of those 81,000 tests that they had administered, 99.5% were negative. So that means either those individuals had come back from travel and weren't symptomatic, or they were symptomatic with cold or flu symptoms, and they're testing negative for this, but obviously have some other illness going on at the time. So, can't hurt, especially Canada's kind of coming out of flu season. Australia's going into it. Definitely beneficial to have in the house.
And that probably, I guess, brings us to the supplement that for us is definitely towards the top of the list, particularly when it starts getting colder, and that would be vitamin D.
Yeah. I mean, I think that anything that you can generally do to strengthen, vitamin D acts as a steroid. So it does contribute to muscle and bone lay down, and it does contribute indirectly to immunity. But it is going to make you a healthier human all around. So I would recommend, it is one of the two supplements I generally say for most people is beneficial year round. I don't think that's specific to this.
Yeah. I just mean as we're getting into the colder months and all of a sudden the sun's kind of not going to be, I guess that's kind of the scary thing too, right? Is, in Melbourne especially, we've got the storyline of a horror movie, but we have like the weather and the backdrop of like a family fantasy, like it's this doom and gloom apocalyptic type, purge that's coming, but it's 28 degrees outside and it's beautiful, right? Which kind of makes social isolation a little bit harder.
It's not 28 degrees here, but considering the winter that we had here in Vancouver, the weather this past week has been just unreal. Like so
the world's trying to throw us a little bit of good with the bad.
Yeah. Well, I guess that kind of
next week it might be rainy and
well, I guess that's the fear for us too, is Melbourne does have that tendency to turn quite quickly. And so coming in with the COVID stuff going on and then going into your regular influenza season, I only kind of thought is like, how much worse would things have got in Europe if things were getting colder and not warmer at this time?
And maybe this is a good little divergence for us, because there's been a lot of myths going around about COVID-19 and its inability to survive in the cold and how it doesn't like the heat. And there's a grain of truth to that, but I think it's being widely misconstrued. The reason colds and flus do so well in those cold winter months is because people are in closer proximity to each other. Mm-hmm. We're huddled inside. We've got ventilation systems that are recirculating that air, and different viruses move in the air differently. COVID-19 tends to fall. It doesn't tend to be airborne. But it's just a lot more intermingling, and so a lot more increased risk. With COVID-19, the medium that the virus is carried in, the particles, tends to liquefy a little bit more in heat. So while it is, and when it liquefies, it doesn't travel as much. So,
Nerd.
Well, it's true that it doesn't like heat. Heat doesn't do anything to kill the actual virus.
So if you're spending an hour and a half in your sauna and you're thinking that's making you immune?
Yeah, probably not. Another big myth that's kind of been going around that aggravates me to no end is the gargling with salt water will be protective. So when we gargle with salt water, that water stays within our oral cavity. The COVID-19 virus lives within our pharynx and lower down, heading into our lungs. So there's no interaction at all. Yeah. It doesn't do anything. So please don't think that, gargling with vinegar or salt water or anything is going to be the supplement that you need to get on board.
I think that's kind of a good time for us to reiterate. What we're talking about here is supplements that can help, but that aren't going to guarantee that you are not going to catch this, right? And essentially, like we said in our previous video, the reality is 80% of us are going to get it. And our hope is that when we become that 80%, it's more like a common cold than a trip to the ICU, right? So I think it's a really good time to reiterate that all these things will help, but none of these things are going to be the difference between whether you get it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Just on the saltwater gargling, when we're talking about things at the moment, how perishables are available and things like that, I always encourage my clients to use a lot of like herbs and spices within their cooking. There's a lot of, I guess you would say, like from olden times, a lot of that like old wives' tale in terms of how oregano and basil and those kind of things can have antibacterial properties. Pomegranate juice is another one. Garlic, yeah. Turmeric is great for inflammation. Ginger. Those are also probably things that are being pushed aside in the run to get to the toilet paper at the supermarket at the moment. Based on like the herbology and stuff that you've been studying, is it worth still trying to incorporate all those things, or is that just more kind of woo-woo naturopath?
It is always worth incorporating those things, because we know from a large history of anecdotal evidence that they do have really positive effects on the body, and they tend to fall into categories of being antibacterial or being anti-inflammatory. However, there is no really good research on almost any herb that would put us in a position to recommend it medically. The biggest reason for that is because there's not these large scale scientific studies done on them like would be done on a drug, because there's just not
right?
Yeah, there's just not the money in it. And in addition to that, dosing varies in extreme amounts in regards to these things, and also preparation. So with turmeric, heating turmeric actually kills 85% of the curcumin, which is the active anti-inflammatory ingredient. So if you're putting it in your cooking and you're putting it in at the beginning, it's gone. It's just a flavor profile that you're getting out of it. So because each of these herbs has to be prepared in such a specific way to confer benefit, you really do kind of need a herbalist or someone who's specialized in that to give you direction around that. However, do these nutrients, herbs, spices, things like that have benefit, and should you just kind of mix them in? I would say they all have nutrients, they all have adaptogens. If you like the flavor of them, yes, throw them in there.
So same approach as you would have with your veggies. Have a mix, a couple of different ones.
Yeah, like it's not going to hurt.
Yeah.
Is it going to be this, this massive curative be all end all? Probably not. One of the things that we do see some research for is vitamin C. So that would kind of be on my list after the zinc. Vitamin C, what we've seen in relation to cold and influenza is that if you've been taking vitamin C consistently leading into the illness, that it can help with the duration and the severity or help you fight it off. But if you start taking vitamin C when you start getting sick, there's no benefit whatsoever.
So don't take it with the zinc, just start taking it now.
And personally, we don't take vitamin C in our household, because when I look at my actual micronutrient profiles for the foods that I eat, and I make a concerted effort to eat more vegetables, but I honestly hate prepping them. And so I wouldn't say I'm one of these people that eats 800 grams a day. But my vitamin C levels are well above and beyond the recommended daily intake just by eating normally. And so there's no benefit to me taking a vitamin C. I'm just going to pee it out.
Perfect. So for those of you who are enjoying the content, that's definitely something that's coming down the pipeline this week, is we're having a bit of a look at Kat's kind of daily intake just for a bit of fun. So some ideas there and some different recipes and some different ways to keep your macros up.
We have a very interesting idea of what's fun, don't we?
We do very well. Okay, cool. So maybe just to recap all that, if you are looking to supplements to help, kind of build that mitigating factor within your life, I think we've said zinc, vitamin D,
and vitamin C in whole food form would be my my recommendation.
Yeah, but definitely no need to go and top up the cupboards with immunity powders and stuff like
and don't waste your money on echinacea. Not only is there no evidence to support it, but there's actual multiple studies which have disproven that echinacea is helpful and immune boosting. So that's one of the first ones that we see people run for. I wouldn't even bother with it.
Perfect. So again, mindful of the time, because again, we are on the fly, and again, we do have consults to get into. But I think we always try to leave you guys with, okay, here's all the theory. That's great, but what are the practical applications here? Like, what can we actually be physically doing? And so I thought maybe we'll kind of just give a rundown of potentially the top 3 most important, because there's lists of 100 out there. Mags, we might sit down and have a chat and do kind of an extended list. But I think for everything that's going on, if we prioritize what's going to get you the most bang for buck and probably the least difficult to do, with everything that is changing and evolving day to day, your routine becomes incredibly important. So for me, that would be my number one thing that I'm telling clients right now is, okay, we've often got your ideal days in terms of how you're going to set your food out and how we're going to meet profile, but we need to do that now for how you're going to set your day up, right? And I think that effect is twofold. If anyone's looking for holiday reading, Atomic Habits by James Clear is incredible. And he talks about, motivation rises and falls, right? But essentially we're always going to drop to the level of our systems. Okay. So if we don't have a system in place, we're going to drop, and we're going to drop pretty hard, and we're going to drop pretty far. And that's where we're going to get into things like rolling out of bed 2 minutes before your first call and spending the day in your pajamas and having that kind of mindset that I'm kind of on holidays, I'm not actually working, I'm not being productive, and now I'm snacking and I'm kind of grazing all day and there's no set lunchtime because there's no real routine. Whether or not you plan and implement a specific routine, you are going to start to develop some habits. And, given the indefinite nature of what's surrounding us, we need to make sure that those routines and those habits that we're now starting to form are serving in nature. Okay, so I think start really small with little things like set yourself a time to get up and have a shower and get in that mindset of the fact that, if you have a job and you are working from home, that it's time to go to work. It's not time to go and sit on the couch with your laptop. Okay. If you have space in your apartment or your house, wherever you are, make a specific space where you are there to work. Set up some sort of desk. We're catching up with Heath Williams, who's an ergonomic specialist today, osteo. He's going to give us some tips on how to set up some space to protect your back and things like that. So definitely stay tuned. But setting up a day structure, and even if it's, sitting shoulders back, even if it's, okay, I'm just going to sit down for an hour and do a batch of emails, and then I'm going to have a coffee. And then I'm going to sit back down for another hour, and I'm going to start to work through my things that I have to get through for the next hour and a half. And then I'm going to have lunch. And I'm going to take my full hour for lunch, and I'm going to read a book or listen to a podcast or see what M&M's put out or go for a walk or have a stretch. And then I'm going to go back and do another 2 hours of work. And then I'm going to have a 15, but something as much detail as you can put into that day plan, and try to just repeat, rinse, repeat each day. That routine is going to make you healthier, give you more feelings of being in control. It's probably going to make sure you're not doing stuff like the absent-minding, nut snacking, drinking 10 coffees a day. And if you're scheduling time to be active in there as well, it's going to keep that as a really important part of your routine too, which kind of leads me into a second practical takeaway. And like we've sort of been, alluding to, your diet and activity don't get put on the back burner because your gym is closed. And if we're going to be concerned about what we can do in terms of supplements to keep ourselves healthy and build a frontline barrier against this thing, those are probably the most important things we can do, right? You need to keep making sure you are, obviously what that looks like is going to be different in terms of what's available from the supermarket. But we want to be making sure that we are sticking to an appropriate profile. If we need to adjust that because all of a sudden we're not walking 40 minutes to the tram both ways, we're not working in a job where we're on our feet for 3 hours, we're probably not training with the same high intensity we'd normally train with for 4 hours at the gym, we kind of lose that buffer against being able to be a little bit slack with the diet and have the occasional snack because we do have so much caloric output. So it's not the time to let the diet fall by the wayside. It's time to double down and really be paying more specific attention to that. Okay. For a lot of our clients who are on templating and things like that, where we do use a grocery list to help them build out their day, again, I encourage you to keep that communication with your coaches high. This might be the perfect time for us to teach you how to use an app like MFP so that we can still make sure that with whatever we've got available, we are still able to meet that appropriate profile. Okay. So definitely something to talk to your coaches about. And being active. it's incredibly easy when you're not allowed to leave the house to not leave the house, right? And inactivity is only going to breed more inactivity. And even with a gym in the garage, sometimes the hardest part is still just dragging your ass up off the couch and getting in there, right? So again, if you're scheduling time in your day to go for a half an hour walk, Mags, I know you're starting a little bit of an MTMM run club within the community itself. I think that's fantastic. And I think, I messaged with the time zone, kind of called it a night at 1:30, 2 a.m. this morning, and had a message from Maggie, and here's a list of the stuff that I want to do tomorrow. She's like, BRB, going for a run. So it's just like, that a girl, Mags, that a girl.
The only reason I went for that run is because I was like, shoot, I posted in the MTM group that I'm going to start running, and all these people started following me on Strava, and I'm like, I need to actually have something to show for. So
there's that accountability,
Find
right?
an accountability partner, right?
Exactly. And if you don't have an accountability partner, again, we are here. If you are listening to this and you are not a client or a community member of MTMM, this is not an exclusive thing just for those we are currently working with or have worked with in the past. And this is going to come through in a lot. We are reaching out to anyone that is struggling to make sense of what's going on, that needs some direction, that needs someone to talk to, like we said, for the last 4 years, we've really tried to build our business on how much can we help the community, how much information can we put out there that's reliable, dispel nutritional dogma, myth, and be a big advocate of both mental and physical fitness for our clients in our community. And this is kind of our opportunity to show that, right? So if, it's not something that needs to be pay for information, we want to put all this good information out there. And if you want to have a little bit of a chat about something we've spoken about or get a little bit of further information, please feel free to reach out, right? I guess for us, this is our kind of opportunity to see how much we can serve the health and fitness community. So build yourself a routine, double down on your diet, and make sure part of that routine is staying active. And I'm just going to touch on this super quickly. Try to stay sober. I know, like, when you're locked in and alcohol, it's probably going to be better as a surface disinfectant for you during these times than as a beverage. We know that, like, alcohol and smoking and stuff like that is going to dampen and weaken your immune system. So if you are someone that's listening to this because you're looking for things that you can do to strengthen that, drinking at this time would be super counterintuitive. Now, I understand there's a lot of anxiety going around, and a glass of wine in the bathtub is probably at the top of a lot of people's lists.
Grab a kombucha.
Have a half a glass of wine if you normally have a bottle. Like, just little things like that in the right direction. Because at the end of the day, like we said, these things aren't going to necessarily be steps that you can take to make sure you don't get sick at all. But if we can line you up 5 or 6 different things that can really mitigate the impact when it does hit, it's essentially, compared to what it could be, it's the same thing, right? Like, if you can throw this off like a common cold instead of going to ICU, you've won. Like, you won that battle.
Well, and I think for, 99.99% of our population, that's not going to be a concern anyways. But what is going to be a concern is just keeping these levels of transmission as low as we can, and keeping our vulnerable populations protected, so that, it's just a cold or a flu for you, but, those people next to us, our pregnant friends and our elderly parents,
pregnant wives,
aren't getting it at all, right? That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Our immunocompromised people in our community, right? So we want to protect them and keep them safe, because for the majority of us, it's going to be a blip on our radar.
Yeah. Cool. I think we probably have to leave it there, but no doubt it won't be long until we sit down again, and it looks like that kind of 8 to 9 a.m. is a really good time before the rest of the world starts actually WFH Mad Dog. So while the internet is pretty good and pretty strong. So guys, definitely stay tuned. We've got a heap of stuff kind of in the works that we're trying to get out to as many of you as we can, as many gyms as we can. If anyone is in a particular community that they feel they could use a little bit of extra help, or if you feel anxiety and tension is a little bit high, we're happy to jump on and do live Q&As. We're putting together some webinars. Stay tuned on the MTMM Instagram page. Everything's going up there as well. Or if you have any ideas about what would be super useful, let us know. We're honestly, we're here to try to best service you guys as much as we can.
Keep an eye as well on the marriedtomymacros.com website. We've got all of our recipes up there. We've got a boatload of resources, including Ben's book list.
There's also a link up there if anyone wants to get protein from True directly and not from myself.
And
if they don't want a high elbow as they come into the garage.
And then, of course, you know, there's our contact information. So if there's something that we've mentioned that you want access to and you just, oh my gosh, where do I even begin to find that? Just flick us an email. We're here for you. Okay. All right.
Happy, Mags? Any closing thoughts? Any final sentiment? Want to give a tagline?
No, I'm just looking forward to the next one. Just looking forward to the next one.
All right. Cheers. All right. Thanks, Mags.
Okay. Talk soon.